The morning light spilled softly over the bamboo fence, touching the little house where Huyen was hanging laundry. The wind carried the scent of wet clothes and guava leaves from a distance. The sound of chickens and children's laughter mingled gently with the hum of the countryside. Dee walked slowly along the narrow dirt path leading to the house. On his shoulder hung a cloth bundle, tied carefully with a faded string. Inside it was something simple and old, small bicycle he had found at the market a week ago. The paint was chipped, one handle was loose, but he had spent every evening fixing it in the shed behind Mr. Tu's house. He had cleaned the rust, tightened the bolts, and even found an old bell that still worked. He didn't know why he had done it. Maybe because every time he saw Maya running barefoot after other children, her laughter bright yet fleeting, something in his heart ached. She never complained, never asked for anything, but Dee could see the quiet wish in her eyes each time a bicycle passed by. Now, standing in front of Huyen's gate, he hesitated. His palms were sweating. Would she think he was going too far? He was not Maya's father. He was just a man who happened to share their days helping fix the roof, chopping wood, carrying water from the well. But to him, this little family had become the center of his world. Dee, you're back early, Huyen called, wiping her hands on her apron. Her smile was gentle, though her eyes carried the quiet tiredness of someone who had endured too much. Dee nodded, avoiding her gaze. I've found something at the market. It's not much, but maybe Maya will like it. He untied the bundle slowly. The small bicycle gleamed faintly in the sun, still a little uneven but full of care. For a moment, Huyen said nothing. She looked at the bicycle, then at him, as if seeing beyond the metal and rust to the effort, the tenderness, and the quiet love hidden beneath it all. Inside the house, Maya's laughter echoed. She had no idea that something beautiful was waiting for her just outside the door. Maya came running out, her tiny feet pattering across the wooden floor. Her hair was still damp from washing, and sunlight caught in the strands like soft gold. She stopped suddenly when she saw the bicycle leaning against the bamboo fence. For a heartbeat, she just stared, her brown eyes wide, reflecting the bright blue of the morning sky. Is that for me?" she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Dee rubbed the back of his neck, smiling awkwardly. "It's a little old, but I fixed it up. If you like, you can try." Maya blinked, then looked up at him as if trying to be sure this was real. When he nodded, she let out a small cry of joy and ran toward the bicycle. Her tiny hands touched the seat, the bell, the handlebars, as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. Huyen stood by the doorway, her hands pressed together. She didn't speak, but her eyes softened, glistening in the light. "Can you help me, Uncle Dee?" Maya asked, trying to climb onto the seat. Dee chuckled. "Hold tight, okay?" He steadied the bicycle, one hand on the back of the seat, the other gently on Maya's shoulder. Her laughter filled the air as he pushed the bicycle forward, slow at first, then a little faster down the dirt path. The bell jingled, a tiny sound, but it carried far, across the green rice fields, through the quiet morning, like a song of happiness that no one had heard for a long time. "Look, Mama, I can ride," Maya shouted, though the front wheel wobbled dangerously. Huyen covered her mouth, laughing through tears. "Careful, sweetheart." Dee kept close, ready to catch her if she fell. But she didn't fall. She kept pedaling, face glowing with pride and freedom, her laughter rising like sunlight itself. For a brief moment, everything seemed still. The air, the trees, Even Dee's heart beat, as if the world paused to watch a little girl find her wings. And in that quiet, Huyen looked at Dee. The way he watched Maya, the way he smiled, it wasn't just kindness anymore. It was love, quiet and deep, the kind that doesn't need words. That evening, the village was wrapped in a soft orange glow. Smoke rose gently from kitchen fires, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the air. Maya was still outside, circling the yard on her little bicycle, her laughter echoing like a bell in the quiet dusk. Dee sat on the porch, his sleeves rolled up, a faint grease stain still on his hands from repairing the chain earlier. He watched her in silence, the way her small feet struggled to reach the pedals, the way her hair flew behind her as she laughed. Each sound, each glimpse of her joy, seemed to fill a space in his heart he hadn't known was empty. Huyen came out with 2 cups of warm tea. She placed one beside him and sat quietly, her gaze following Maya's joyful movements. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Words felt unnecessary. After a while, Huyen said softly, "You made her so happy today." Dee smiled faintly. "She made me happy," he replied, his voice almost a whisper. "I didn't expect. Just a small thing like that could mean so much." Huyen turned to look at him. The fading light touched his face, tired, gentle, honest. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, a quiet warmth, a longing he was too humble to confess. "She's been through a lot," Huyen murmured. "But when she's with you, she laughs like she used to. Before everything." Dee lowered his gaze. "She deserves to laugh. You both do." The night grew deeper. Maya finally parked her bicycle near the fence and sat on the step, yawning. Dee walked over, knelt down, and brushed the dust from her knees. "Tired already, little one?" he asked, smiling. Maya nodded sleepily, leaning against him without hesitation. Her small hand found his, and for a second, she rested her head on his arm. That tiny gesture made his chest tighten. A mix of joy, pain, and something he couldn't name. As he carried her inside, her toy bell still jingled faintly. From the bicycle outside, like a promise of something tender and lasting. Under the quiet lamplight, Huyen watched them, the man and the child, and her heart trembled. In that fragile, fleeting moment, she saw what home could look like again. The next morning arrived softly. Sunlight spilled across the yard, brushing against the dew on the guava leaves. Maya's laughter was already echoing through the air as she ran to her bicycle, eager to begin her little adventure again. Dee was tightening a loose rope near the garden when he heard her voice calling out, high and bright. "Dad, Dad, look, I can ride all the way to the gate now." The word Dad froze him in place. For a second, he thought he had heard wrong. But when he turned around, Maya was looking right at him, her face beaming with pure joy, her small hands gripping the handlebars, the sunlight dancing in her eyes. Huyen, who had been sweeping the porch, stopped too. The broom slipped quietly from her fingers. Dee's heart thudded in his chest. He wanted to say something, but no words came. His throat tightened, and the world seemed to blur. The wind, the birds, even the golden morning light. He took a small step forward. "Maya, what did you call me?" he asked gently. Maya blinked, confused by his trembling voice. "Dad," she said again, smiling proudly, "because you fixed my bicycle, and you always help Mama. You're like a dad, aren't you?" Dee knelt slowly on the ground. The air around him felt heavy and tender all at once. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He simply opened his arms, and Maya ran into them without hesitation. He held her tightly, his eyes closing. A warmth spread through him, fragile, almost painful, but real. Behind them, Huyen stood still. Her eyes glistened, her lips pressed together as if holding back all the emotions that wanted to escape. The word dad had reopened something in her heart, something she had buried long ago, when she thought love and family were no longer meant for her. Dee finally looked at her. Their eyes met, and though neither spoke, there was understanding, deep, wordless, and human. The small bicycle stood by the fence, its bell catching the morning wind. It chimed once, soft, clear, like a blessing for the three souls who had unknowingly become a family. That evening, the sky turned a quiet shade of amber. The fields were still, and the sound of crickets filled the air. The little bicycle rested by the bamboo fence, its silver bell glinting softly. In the fading light, a silent witness to something beautiful that had been born that morning. Maya had fallen asleep early, curled up on the mat beside the old window. Her small hand still clutched the corner of her blanket, a faint smile lingering on her lips. Perhaps she was dreaming of riding down the dirt path again, the wind on her face and Dee's laughter behind her. Dee stood outside, fixing the last wooden plank of the fence. He worked slowly, not because the task was hard, but because he didn't want the evening to end. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the creak of bamboo, felt alive, like part of a world he didn't want to lose. Huyen stepped out with a small lantern. The soft light touched her face, gentle and thoughtful. She watched him in silence for a while before speaking. "She called you dad today," she said softly. Dee paused, setting the hammer down. "I didn't expect that," he murmured, smiling faintly. It felt strange, but also, he stopped, searching for words that didn't come. Huyen finished for him, "Like something you've been waiting to hear." He looked at her then, really looked, the tiredness in her eyes, the quiet strength in the way she stood. There was a fragility to her smile, but also a peace he hadn't seen before. "She's just a child," Huyen continued, "but maybe she sees things more clearly than we do." Dee nodded. The wind passed between them, carrying the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. "I don't know what will happen tomorrow," he said, his voice low. "But as long as I'm here, I'll protect you both." "That's a promise." Huyen's eyes softened. She didn't reply, just stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. It was a quiet gesture, but it carried the weight of trust, of gratitude, of something like love. Inside, Maya stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about her bicycle. Dee glanced toward her, smiling. The night deepened. Fireflies began to glow among the grass, flickering like tiny stars. Dee and Huyen stood side by side under the starlit sky, neither speaking, only listening to the sound of the wind and the faint ringing of the bicycle bell in the distance. It was a small, fragile sound, but in that silence, it felt eternal, a promise, a beginning, and the quiet heartbeat of a family finally finding its way home.